I'm currently at the 6th Tiger Conference in the heart of Kiev and hosting Michael Bociurkiw about rebranding Ukraine and soft power in Ukraine. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
You're just out of a panel about rebranding Ukraine. What does it mean, rebranding Ukraine? And is Ukraine a brand itself?
Well, we had a great panel here of 2 foreign experts and 2 from Ukraine or near Ukraine. And I think the main message out of the panel was that Ukraine needs to devote a lot more resources to tell its story. The government, donors as well, need to put the resources aside to get Ukraine's story out. Now, of course, there's a number of ways to do it. I mean, of course, one can make flashy videos, things like that. I showed a video, for example, from South Africa that really wowed everybody. But there are other things too. For example, empowering the diplomatic corps. One of the speakers said that Ukraine has the widest network of Ukrainian embassies of many countries its size. So let's look at restructuring these embassies where each of them has a spokesperson, or at least the ambassadors are trained to talk to the media. The other idea that came up, I mean, it's actually one that I advocate a lot of, is that, you know, it can't only be Ukrainian speaking, it can't only be Ukrainian diaspora speaking. We have to have our own kind of network of goodwill ambassadors or surrogates. For example, I made the example on the panel, wouldn't it be great if someone like George Clooney could speak about Ukraine and how great it is with the same passion he speaks about Darfur and South Sudan as well. So there are a number of things that can be done, but I think the main thing right now is for Ukraine to get its house in order. There's a lot of bad news floating around, there's a lot of fake news floating around, but in order for us to build this brand image, we need everyone on the same page at the same table, government, private sector, different ministries talking together, because right now I think we all agree on the panel that this is all done in kind of a silo mentality. People aren't talking to each other. There's many grants, donors are giving money that are active right now to do a branding strategy, but it isn't a coordinated effort.
So as I understand, the idea is to attract, as you say, donors and investors in Ukraine. So the idea is to create a sort of, not to create, but to tell the narrative about an identity, if I understand you well.
Yes, yes. And so look, we have to, who is our audience, right? We have to look at that. So basically you have the media, the foreign media, you have investors, and you have potential tourists. So the effort needs to incorporate all of those constituencies. But again, in order to attract their attention, we need a good story to tell. What is the Ukrainian narrative? We brought up a lot of good points. We have a very talented and low-cost human resource base here. The infrastructure is good. It just came out yesterday. Ukraine has the cheapest internet access in the world after another country. So, you know, that is a good thing. And then also the infrastructure is improving, the airports, the roads, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, this came out very clearly, not only in this panel, but the previous one, is we have to get serious about the battle against corruption. You're not going to get foreign investors to come here, the Googles of the world, the Amazons, unless they're guaranteed the rule of law, that they don't have to pay bribes anymore to get business permits done. And you know that the ease of doing business, especially moving money in and out of the country, is very, very important for them. Otherwise, they're not going to come and do business here. Our other big concern is that we're losing talent. I'm going to be speaking about this tomorrow night, that there's a brain drain going on of young Ukrainians who are seeking better opportunities abroad. Why? Because the pay here is very low. They see the opportunities is not that great. And then again, corruption is almost endemic.
You've been traveling all around the world. You've been working for CNN and BBC. You've been covering Eastern Ukraine, the MH17 crash too. Yeah. Did you see something changing in the communication around Eastern Ukraine? Because it seems that, don't mind me saying that West is forgetting about this.
Well, they are. In fact, I often approach producers from various big networks, CNN, BBC, and say, hey, guys, come on, there's a big story going on right now. It should be covered. And, you know, they do take an interest, but, you know, we have a very big competition on our hands right now with what's going on in Syria, in Yemen, North Korea with the Trump White House. So the Ukraine story has fallen quite far down. But yet, I think there are ways to still get the story out. It is long-term work. It's not going to happen overnight. But again, one aspect of that is having proper spokespersons to talk about Ukraine. And that, in a way, begins with our embassies abroad, with our ambassadors, regularly going out and talking to media. And for that to happen, you have to have relationships with media. The other thing is that it came out today in the panel is you not only have a product, but you'll also have a story, a message to say. And in terms of the situation in eastern Ukraine, right now, as we sit here, Ukraine has the 9th biggest population in the world of internally displaced people. And there are a lot of stories around that, a whole issue, about how this mass migration has moved into different parts of Ukraine and pretty much settled there. But you know what? They've actually been welcomed, and they're finding opportunities, and they're not trying to sneak into other European countries. Ukraine is handling that problem on its own. So stories like that are really great stories to tell. Just the creativity here, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in the high-tech sector where we have guys who are among the best hackers in the world, or they're building interactive tables where people can order in a restaurant a meal right on the table and then post their food, the pictures of their food on social media. Really cool stuff like that. And again, we need to get that story out more.
Speaking about the IDPs, internal displaced person, as a Westerner before coming in Ukraine, I wasn't aware of this problem, to be frank. And I have a feeling there is a lack of understanding and communication of what IDPs are already. And some things seem to be really peculiar and concern Ukraine. How do you make the West understand that these problems can be other people's problem, other countries' problem?
Well, look, the other thing I have to say is, I told you there's also positive stories about the IDPs, but, there was a conference last week on this topic, and both government and non-government officials from the UN said that it seems like the Ukrainian government or the bureaucrats are doing everything possible to make the IDPs dislike Ukraine, to make them angry. Things like getting residency permits, work permits, the ability to vote, to get their pensions, their social benefits. This is a problem that can be fixed very quickly. But I think the word has to come from the top, from the Poroshenko administration, is that we're going to take this problem much more seriously than we have. Of course, the government is preoccupied with the war in the East. It's hopefully preoccupied with the battle against corruption. But this is a big mass of people right now. And the West has to realize that it too has a responsibility. The diaspora community has a responsibility. And I'll give you an example. There's a United Nations appeal right now to raise millions of dollars, I think it's 20 million plus, to provide humanitarian assistance to people living on both sides of the contact line. And that appeal is only a small portion of it is funded right now. For some reason, people are not donating money to this. But I think if they realized the problems, that the need of these people to be properly housed and fed, a big proportion of the IDPs are children and the elderly. They're typically, we know from working other disasters in the world, they're the most vulnerable. Exactly. So special attention needs to be, paid to the children, to education. A lot of schools have been bombed out or damaged. A lot of hospitals. A lot of children are very badly affected psychosocially, so they need help, to be able to learn and concentrate. A whole range of things. Right now, Ukraine is the only country in Europe that is getting food aid from the World Food Program. That's how bad things are in eastern Ukraine right now. It's a humanitarian crisis. That word has to get out.
Coming back to the soft power, and if this word comes out and the West really gives a hand to Ukraine, do you think it might help against the, let's say, soft power and propaganda machine that Russia uses right now? Do you think it can be efficient enough to appeal?
Well, look, number one is Russia and its proxies are throwing everything they can at Ukraine to cause fake news, disinformation, manipulation. it's really a tsunami of negativity, of toxicity. And Ukraine alone cannot battle this. I think we need more support from people like the European Union, from other donor countries, to really combat this. Now, this isn't, of course, a problem only unique to Ukraine. We've had proper evidence of the Russians meddling in elections, from Brexit to, Catalonia, to France, to the United States especially. So this is a problem that needs to be tackled collectively, but with huge resources, not $1 billion a year that the EU wants to give to a Stratcoms initiative. The other thing, of course, is there are some things that are very difficult to combat. Every time the word Manafort is spoken, it's attached to the word Ukraine. Now, is that the way we want the world to see us? I don't think so. And other things as well about how the elections went and Ukraine's attitude towards that. So there are a number of things that can be done, but again, I think the main message out of today was that we need a coherent, coordinated strategy to deal with all these things. It's a tall order to deal with, and for sure we can't do it alone. Now, to answer your question about the soft power, look, I think the more we can get people to think about Ukraine in soft ways, whether it's vyshyvanka or embroidery, whether it's our fashion, our culture and arts, it gives another face to the country. And you know what? That draws tourists. It draws more interest in the country. So this is one of the most, I traveled all over. This is one of the most diverse countries in the world. It really is. And, we have minorities. We have Greek minority, Turkish minorities, Crimean Tatars. On the Ukraine's border with the west of Europe, we have minority groups there. And they all have unique things, unique food and products and traditions to share.
True. I'm going to come back to these minorities just after, but so would you say that this stuff, there is this wide opinion among Ukrainians that this Ukrainian identity built itself against its powerful neighbor, against Russia, and tends not to define itself by an autonomous identity. In some sort of way, you have vyshyvankas and other things. How to ensure that real independence, mental and identity independence can be most stable in those cases?
Well, pre-2014, Ukrainians were traveling back and forth to Russia very freely. There are a lot of families here that even colleagues I've worked with, they have one parent here and one in Russia. People from here would go to work in Russia as well. So, it has to be acknowledged that those human ties are still there, that will, one way or another, affect things here. The other big connection with Russia is, as far as I understand, the biggest trading partner still with Ukraine. That kind of connection is slowly shifting towards Western Europe. So I think to a lot of outsiders, they're quite confused about the Ukrainian identity here and where it really lies. And I think that is another kind of priority for Ukraine to magnify, to emphasize, is that we are an independent nation. We have our own rich history going back thousands of years. It's a message that Putin and his cronies do not want to come out. So again, going back to the point I made earlier, is a lot of resources have to be spent to do this. The other thing I'll say is that, I'm tired of seeing Poroshenko and people like that being the only ones to speak on behalf of Ukraine. We need more voices out there. And I think one way that will happen if second languages are encouraged here. Ukrainians learn more English, more French, German, that sort of thing, because in a way, they're the best ambassadors you can have for our country. So when they travel, they can speak to other people and tell the Ukrainian narrative. But right now, it's too much a small group of people saying the same message and in a very dry and stilted way.
There has been this really interesting phenomenon since maybe 2 or 3 years, and you talked about it before. Fashion.
Yeah.
How do you explain this? Eastern Europe, Ukrainian.
I'm wearing Ukrainian-made socks, for example. But it used to be in the old days, Soviet times, we came from diaspora, we would bring things here. We don't do that anymore. In fact, when I'm here, I actually shop for Ukrainian goods, ranging from suits to peanut butter to honey to soap. Ukrainian wines are fantastic. They're almost world class. So that is the other thing I'd like to see, is that Another way for this soft narrative, if you want to call it that, is for the government and our embassies to promote Ukrainian products, Ukrainian fashion. There's a lot of, with these free trade agreements with Europe, with Canada now, it'll be a lot easier to do that because they're not going to be given heavy duties. But look, at a very start, there are very simple things that can be done at all Ukrainian embassies. They should be, for example, serving Ukrainian wine or Ukrainian products, because these are really great ways to kind of transmit the story about how Ukraine is talented, how we've got creative people here doing really cool things, that we have people here producing world-class products.
And that's going to be a last question, traditional question. How do you see Ukraine in 10 years?
I see Ukraine, I'm going to be an optimist on this one. I see it as incredibly independent. I see it as a peaceful nation with no conflict going on. I wish Crimea would be returned to Ukraine. I don't know if that will ever happen, but this is not only important from an industrial economic point of view, but the matter of sovereignty. I hope that the world order reprioritizes itself, that the world order gets reprioritized in the sense that, sovereignty must be fought for and protected. The past two conferences I've been to, there's been a lot of talk about the Budapest Memorandum and how Ukraine handed over its arsenal of nuclear weapons in return for guarantees of its sovereignty. Well, it hasn't been honored. So that does raise a lot of concern about, but at the end of the day, I think whether you talk about Ukraine, whether you talk about Sudan, Zimbabwe, is that at the end of the day, the country has to be prepared to defend itself, to stand up for what it feels is important. And Ukraine has to start thinking that way. We need very, very strong leadership here. And also, I see in 10 years from now a new generation of Ukrainians running the country. I met someone yesterday. I said, what do you want to do when you grow up? She said, I want to be president of Ukraine. I think a few years ago, we wouldn't have heard that. Now, for something like that to happen, of course, is we have to make it possible for people like that who have those aspirations. And in that particular example, it means electoral reform. The only path to office is not one which is paid for with millions of dollars. It's one where you get there on behalf of your hard work, your campaigning, your ideas, your ability to attract voters. But I really do hope, and I'll end on something I said earlier, is about this brain drain problem we're facing right now. That's my biggest concern right now, is that I think Ukraine doesn't have much time anymore to play with, that it has to get its house in order, that it has to bring in reforms, health reforms, things like that, land reform, battle corruption. Wages have to rise. To survive here on the average salary of $200, $250 a year is not possible. Sorry, a month is not possible for most people. So we need to ensure a bright future to the young people of Ukraine, because they're going to be the ones, at the end of the day, that build a nation.
Well, thank you very much for this interview. It was a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you.